In the summer of 1994, a man pulled his car to the side of the road somewhere in the middle of America and sat there for a long time without moving. He had just quit one of the most prestigious jobs on Wall Street. He had just walked away from a salary most people spend their entire lives trying to reach. He had just told his boss, a man who had mentored him, believed in him, and given him every opportunity, that he was leaving to start a company selling books on the internet. His boss had laughed, not cruelly, not dismissively, just the genuine, confused laugh of a brilliant man who could not understand why someone would throw away everything for an idea that made no logical sense. Jeff Bezos sat in that car on the side of that road and did the calculation one more time. The calculation he had been doing in his head for weeks. The one that kept coming back to the same answer, no matter how many times he ran it. If he tried and failed, he would always wonder what would have happened if he had tried. If he never tried at all, he would spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what he had given up. He started driving again. That decision, made on the side of a road in the middle of America in the summer of 1994, would eventually produce the largest online store in the history of human commerce. It would make Jeff Bezos the first person in history to accumulate a net worth of over $150 billion. It would change how every human being on Earth buys, sells, and receives goods forever. But before any of that happened, there was a garage. There was a door on sawhorses used as a desk. There was a bell that rang every time someone made a purchase. And there was a man who had walked away from everything to build something the entire world told him would never work. This is the real story of Jeff Bezos, and it starts much earlier than that car on the side of the road. Jeffrey Preston Jorgensen was born on January 12, 1964 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His mother, Jacqueline, was 17 years old when he was born. His father, Ted Jorgensen, was 19. They were teenagers trying to figure out how to be parents before they had figured out how to be adults, and the marriage was difficult from the beginning. When Jeff was 3 years old, his father walked out and did not come back. Jacqueline was left alone with a toddler, no support, and a future that looked impossibly narrow. She worked whatever job she could find to keep them afloat. She was determined, resourceful, and completely unwilling to accept that her son's life would be defined by the circumstances of his birth. When Jeff was 4 years old, she met a man named Miguel Bezos. Miguel Bezos was a Cuban immigrant who had arrived in America as a 16-year-old with almost nothing. He had come through a Catholic charity program, learned English, worked his way through the University of Albuquerque, and built himself a stable and successful life entirely through discipline and determination. He was exactly the kind of man who understood that where you start has nothing to do with where you finish. Miguel adopted Jeff. He gave him his name, and in doing so, he gave him something far more valuable than a surname. He gave him a living example of what a man could build from absolutely nothing if he refused to be defined by his starting point. The family eventually moved to Miami, where Miguel worked as an engineer for Exxon. They were not wealthy, but they were stable and loving, and Jeff grew up in an environment that rewarded curiosity, effort, and ambition. From the very beginning, it was clear that Jeff Bezos was different. He was obsessed with how things worked, not in a casual, passing way, in an all-consuming, cannot stop thinking about it way. As a toddler, he had taken apart his own crib with a screwdriver because he wanted to understand how it was built. His mother had to child-proof the house, not against accidents, but against Jeff systematically disassembling everything in it. Every summer, his parents sent him to his maternal grandfather's ranch in Texas. His grandfather, Gus Jice, was a former regional director of the Atomic Energy Commission, a man of deep technical knowledge and extraordinary self-reliance, who could fix anything, build anything, and solve any problem with whatever materials were available. Jeff spent those summers working alongside his grandfather, learning that intelligence without practical application was useless, and that real capability meant being able to look at a problem and find a solution regardless of what resources you had. Those summers shaped him more than any classroom ever did. At school, Jeff was exceptional. Not just academically, he was the kind of student who made teachers simultaneously proud and exhausted. He pushed back on everything. He questioned every assumption. He refused to accept an answer just because an authority figure had given it. He wanted to know why. Always why. He graduated valedictorian of his high school class. He won a Silver Knight Award, one of the most prestigious academic honors in Florida. He was accepted to Princeton University, where he studied electrical engineering and computer science, and graduated summa cum laude. After Princeton, he was recruited by some of the most prestigious firms on Wall Street. He chose a quantitative hedge fund called D.E. Shaw, one of the most sophisticated and selective financial firms in the world. He rose through the ranks with extraordinary speed. By his early 30s, he was a senior vice president, one of the youngest in the firm's history, earning a salary that put him among the most financially secure people of his generation. He had everything. And then in 1994, he read a statistic that changed everything. Internet usage was growing at 2,300% per year. He read that number and sat with it for a long time. 2,300%, not 20%, not 200%, 2,300%. He had never seen a number like that attached to any technology in his lifetime. And his mind, the mind that had taken apart his crib as a toddler, that had spent summers learning to solve problems from scratch, that had processed quantitative data at one of the most sophisticated financial firms in the world, immediately began calculating what that number meant for commerce. He made a list of 20 possible products that could be sold over the internet. He analyzed each one against a set of criteria he had developed, and at the top of that list, the product that scored highest on every single metric were books. Books existed in extraordinary variety. There were more than 3 million titles in print at any given time. No physical store could stock more than a fraction of them. An online store had no such limitation. A customer in rural Montana looking for an obscure technical manual could find it just as easily as a customer in New York looking for a bestseller. The selection advantage of an online bookstore over a physical one was so overwhelming that it was not even a competition. He went to his boss and told him what he was thinking. His boss told him to take 48 hours before making any decision. He said it was a good idea, but that it was a better idea for someone who did not already have a great job. He told Jeff to think carefully about what he was walking away from. Jeff thought carefully, and then he quit. He called his wife Mackenzie and told her he was leaving D.E. Shaw to start an internet bookstore. Mackenzie, brilliant, grounded, and completely unintimidated by risk, said she was in. They loaded everything they owned into a car and drove across the country to Seattle, Washington. Jeff typed the business plan on his laptop while Mackenzie drove. They chose Seattle for 2 reasons. It was close to a major book distributor in Oregon, and it had a deep pool of technical talent because of Microsoft's presence in the region. They rented a house in Bellevue. Jeff set up his office in the garage. He built his first desk by buying a door from a hardware store and placing it across 2 sawhorses. It cost $60. That $60 door desk would become one of the most famous symbols in the history of American business, a reminder of the principle that money should always be spent on things that matter to customers and never on things that merely make the office look impressive. He named the company Amazon after the largest river on Earth because he wanted to build the largest store on Earth. He hired a small team. He built the website. He sourced books from distributors. And on July 16, 1995, Amazon went live. The first week was chaos of the best possible kind. Jeff and his small team were completely unprepared for what happened. Orders started coming in immediately, not just from Seattle, not just from Washington State, but from across America and from countries around the world. Within the first week, Amazon had received orders from all 50 states and 45 countries. Jeff had set up a bell that rang every time an order came in. Within days, the bell was ringing so constantly that they had to turn it off because it was impossible to work over the noise. They were packing and shipping books themselves from the garage floor, on their hands and knees, wrapping packages until the early hours of the morning. Jeff told his team they needed to buy keyboards for their knees. One of his employees looked at him and said, "Jeff, we need packing tables." He later said that was one of the most clarifying moments of his early business life. He had been so deep inside the problem that he had missed the obvious solution completely. He bought packing tables the next day. Amazon's revenue in its first year was $511,000. In its second year, it was $15.7 million. But the growth came at a cost. Amazon was not profitable. It was spending everything it made and more on expansion, technology, and infrastructure. Investors who did not understand what Bezos was building looked at the losses and walked away. Wall Street analysts called it Amazon.bomb. Serious financial commentators wrote detailed articles explaining why the company was fundamentally broken and would inevitably collapse. Jeff Bezos did not argue with them. He did not hold press conferences to defend his strategy. He kept his head down and kept building. He understood something that his critics did not. He was not trying to build a bookstore. He was not even trying to build an online retailer. He was trying to build infrastructure. He was trying to build the underlying architecture of commerce itself. The warehouses, the logistics networks, the technology platforms, the payment systems that everything else would eventually run on top of. He called it the flywheel. Lower prices attracted more customers. More customers attracted more sellers. More sellers created more selection. More selection attracted more customers. More customers gave Amazon the scale to lower prices further. The flywheel fed itself. And once it reached sufficient speed, it would become almost impossible to stop. Every dollar Amazon made went back into spinning the flywheel faster. In 1999, Time magazine named Jeff Bezos Person of the Year. Amazon stock had risen from $18 at its IPO to over $100. Jeff Bezos was worth an estimated $10 billion on paper. And then the dot-com bubble burst. Amazon stock fell from over $100 to $6. 94% of its value was gone. Serious analysts were writing Amazon's obituary. Investors who had watched the stock rise and believed the story now watched it fall and abandoned it. The narrative had shifted completely from visionary pioneer to cautionary tale. Jeff Bezos held firm. He gathered his team and told them that the stock price was not the company, that the fundamentals of what they were building had not changed because the stock price had changed, that if they kept doing the right things for customers, the stock would eventually reflect the reality of the business. He told them to focus on the things they could control and ignore the noise. They kept building. Amazon survived the dot-com crash. Then it launched Amazon Prime, a subscription service that offered free 2-day shipping for a flat annual fee. Every logistics expert in the industry said the economics were impossible, that Amazon would lose money on every Prime member, that it was a suicidal pricing strategy. Prime became one of the most successful subscription products in the history of retail. It did not just retain customers, it fundamentally changed their behavior. Prime members spent on average 4 times more than non-Prime members. The shipping cost was not a loss. It was an investment in loyalty that paid back multiples of what it cost. Then Amazon launched Amazon Web Services, a cloud computing platform that allowed businesses to rent computing infrastructure instead of building their own. The internal debate about whether to offer this service externally was intense. It seemed completely disconnected from everything Amazon was known for. AWS became the most profitable division in Amazon's history. Today it generates more profit than the entire retail operation. It powers a significant percentage of the internet. Companies like Netflix, Airbnb, and thousands of others run entirely on AWS infrastructure, then the Kindle, then Alexa, then Amazon Studios, then Amazon Pharmacy, then Amazon Fresh, then a logistics network so vast that it operates its own planes, its own trucks, its own last-mile delivery system. Each new venture was questioned. Each new venture was criticized. Each new venture was declared premature, misguided, or impossibly ambitious. Each one changed the world. Today, Amazon is worth over $1.8 trillion. It employs over 1.5 million people, making it one of the largest employers on Earth. Jeff Bezos stepped down as CEO in 2021, worth approximately $200 billion, the richest man on Earth at the time. And it all started with a door on 2 sawhorses in a garage in Bellevue, Washington. But here is what I need you to understand before this video ends. Jeff Bezos did not build Amazon because he was the smartest person in the room. There were people smarter than him on Wall Street. There were better engineers in Seattle. There were more experienced retailers in America. He built it because of one thing. He called it the Regret Minimization Framework. When faced with the decision to leave his job and start Amazon, he asked himself one question: When I am 80 years old and I look back at my life, which will I regret more? Trying and failing, or never trying at all? The answer was immediate and absolute. He would never regret trying. He would always regret not trying. And that framework, that single question asked honestly and answered courageously, is available to every single person watching this video right now. You do not need a Princeton degree to use it. You do not need a Wall Street salary to walk away from. You do not need a garage in Seattle. You just need the courage to ask yourself the question, what will you regret more at 80, trying and failing, or never trying at all? Because if a 17-year-old mother's son from Albuquerque, New Mexico, a boy whose father walked out before he could remember him, could build the largest store in the history of human commerce from a $60 door on 2 sawhorses in a garage, then the only thing standing between you and your own version of that story is the decision to start. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that your starting point is not your ending point, and that the distance between where you are and where you want to be is measured not in resources, but in decisions, then subscribe to Billionaire Blueprint right now. Every single week, we bring you the untold stories of the men and women who started with absolutely nothing and built empires that changed the world. These are not fairy tales. These are real people with real failures and real moments where they chose to keep going when every logical voice around them said, stop. Subscribe, stay with us, and let us build something extraordinary together.